right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. We will probably have people rolling in over the next few minutes, which is a-okay. Welcome to Watertown Forward's second City Chat. My name is Janice Hudson, for anyone who doesn't know me. I am the chair of Watertown Forward. For anyone who is new to us, Watertown Forward is a nonpartisan civic action group, and our mission is to educate, engage, and empower the Watertown community and local government. For anyone who is already familiar with us, which I see a lot of familiar faces here today, welcome back. Many community members already know us through our earlier work, engaging the community in Watertown's charter review. And after the charter was voted on and passed last November, we took a short break to regroup and refocus. And after some feedback from the community, we decided to reemerge with a similar but broader mission to serve as a conduit for civic engagement in our community more broadly. So we are happy to be back to offer you some new things. With our roots, though, in the charter, it made most sense to begin our new chapter by following the development of certain key amendments in our charter. We began back in July, actually, we had a city chat on the process of creating a Human Rights Commission in Watertown as indicated by the charter, and recently launched a charter dashboard, which it basically tracks the progress on over 20 amendments in our charter. We'll sort of talk a little bit more about that later. Today, however, is our first pass at really branching out beyond the charter directly. And we are really excited to talk about the comprehensive plan, because it is a topic that has drummed up a lot of local interest, as it should. And while the city has made great efforts to engage the community on this topic, we thought it was well worthy of more attention. Specifically, we felt there was more opportunity for residents to engage in active dialogue, both with each other and with some of the key planning experts involved in the comprehensive plan. So that is what we are hoping to offer you today. As you have gathered, the comprehensive plan is incredibly complex. And for any topic with this kind of weight, we really feel that ongoing conversation is paramount to keeping the community engaged and informed. So that said, we will launch into our agenda very quickly. If you want to hit the next slide, Vana. We have, for starters, a brief and broad overview of the comprehensive plan, and we will leave some room for a brief discussion after Tia will give you an overview, just to solidify understanding so that we're all starting the Q&A on equal footing. From there, we will transition to a facilitated Q&A with our three expert guests, who we will introduce a little bit later. And to help prioritize our time during that Q&A, we will focus our questions around the results of a poll that we will launch. And if there are any topics that emerge that we don't get to today from that poll, this may be a really great opportunity to help define and focus our next city chat. So all ideas are welcome. We will close the meeting today by asking for suggestions and feedback and sharing some of our work, and also how to stay in touch and volunteer with Watertown Forward. So on to the boring stuff, meeting guidelines. You've all been through this probably many times before, but just for posterity, we will be following basic Zoom etiquette today. Raise your hand to be recognized, mute yourself if you're not speaking. The chat function is open and can be used by anybody for comments or questions. We do have chat monitors here today, including myself, who will be available to address some of these questions if they're not addressed in the presentation or in the discussion. And we'll also be linking a bunch of relevant documents and articles throughout the meeting in there. So just to keep traffic down a little bit, if you see anybody who's here today in attendance that you want to catch up with about the weekend and about the kids, we just encourage you to pop on over to the participant list and private message that person, just to keep traffic down. You'll see everyone's name there on your screen under participants. If you're on the phone, which I don't think we have anyone on the phone today, just make sure you announce who you are so that we know who we're talking to. And then, of course, we always say this, but it is very important. We ask that people just bring their curiosity and an open mind, and to also be mindful of the time if you have any comments or questions, so that everybody has an opportunity to share and be heard. And we may call on people out of order, just to ensure that we're sharing the microphone and keeping things equitable. And Watertown Forward is comprised of volunteers who are also residents of Watertown. So it's very important to us that we share that the individual views, our individual views do not necessarily reflect Watertown Forward as a whole when we're speaking as a resident. Just want to make that distinction. And today's meeting will be recorded, just so we have some disclosure around that. And I think that is all the boring stuff. I try to get through that part pretty quickly. And at this point, I'm going to actually hand the microphone to my colleague, Tia, who will bring us through that high-level overview so that we're all sort of in a base level understanding of what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. Thank you, Janice.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's great to see some faces I haven't seen through the summer, some faces I have seen through the summer. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Tia Tilson. I've lived in Watertown for about 30 years now. I've had the pleasure of working with Watertown Forward, both as a facilitator and more recently as a steering committee member. You know, it's our work to engage all of you in the important conversations we're having here in Watertown. So thank you for being here. And today we're joined by some excellent invited expert guests. They're going to help us answer some of our questions, which we've targeted in a way, and engage us around what's on our minds with the comprehensive plan. And I see that we've got two folks. We're hoping to be joined by a third. The first is Gideon Schreiber, AICP. And Gideon, what does AICP stand for?
It's basically a certified planner through our American Planning Association. So.
Excellent. Gideon, as many of you may know, is Watertown's Assistant Director of Planning within the Department of Community Development and Planning. He's been with us in our city for 12 years in this role, and he's worked during this time, he's worked on a broad range of planning efforts and initiatives, including the 2015 Comprehensive Plan, implementing the Commercial Design Guidelines, open space and recreation, bike ped, that's bicycle and pedestrian, transportation and complete streets, and creation of Live Well Watertown initiatives. He also manages the zoning review for projects and supports the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals. Prior to coming to work for Watertown, he did work around Boston in a nonprofit working on implementing sustainable city implementation and programming around green infrastructure and the increased tree canopy. So he brings a lot of great experience to the items and programs that we have uppermost in mind here in Watertown, and he's also a Watertown resident. We are also joined by City Councilor at Large, John Arazian. Hi, John. Thank you for coming. John joined the council this past November. He serves on the committees of Rules and Ordinances, Climate and Energy, Education, and the School System Matters, as well as serving on the Comprehensive Planning Advisory Committee. John grew up here in Watertown. He's a graduate of our very own Watertown High School, as well as St. Anselm College. He owns Eastern Clothing Company and lives in District D with his wife, Jackie, and their 3 sons. And I'm hoping, if he's not here, I don't have a full screen of everybody. Dan D'Amico, have you been able to join us yet? Shout out.
He is not yet here.
Okay.
I think there was a little bit of confusion about start time, but he is
excellent. I'm going to introduce him. So when he does show up, you will all be well prepared to say hello. Dan also grew up in Watertown and is also a graduate of our very own Watertown High School and a UMass graduate, UMass Boston graduate. And I think most recently with a master's from Boston College. He's been a longtime soccer coach in Watertown for over 15 years, where working with the youth here in Watertown, and runs his own business, the Charles River Soccer Club. He lives in Coolidge Square, is a member of the Comprehensive Planning Advisory Committee, and during the day, when he's not, focusing his time on Watertown, he works as an analyst for an insurance company. So I want to thank those invited guests and all of you, because many of the folks that are gathered here today as participants bring their own expertise in a variety of the other planning efforts that have been going on. I know we have at least 3 additional city councilors with us tonight. I see Vinnie Piccirilli, I see Tony Palumba, I see Nicole Gardner. Have I missed anybody in terms of our represented officials? Okay. I see representatives of many of the boards and commissions here in Watertown as well. So thank you all for joining us and bringing your expertise and your questions. Our hope today in this conversation is to focus on some of the questions we've heard from the community. There's been a rich amount of opportunity for people to weigh in, and it is not our intent to duplicate the efforts that have been going on. It's to be additive. And we did some quick conversations, or we reached out to people informally to find out what was on their mind. And what I'm going to do at this top part of the hour, and it won't be that long, is just to provide some basic information about the comprehensive plan and leave it to our invited experts to provide the more meaty content. And so then we're going to poll the group on how to focus the rest of our time. So any questions thus far in terms of where we're going and how we're going to get there? Okay, so letting you all know, I don't know whether you all are having some of the same, I'm experiencing kind of, I've got my gallery view and I've got the slide there, and so we're managing slides and links. So I'm hoping that everybody can see everyone, and once we get through the slides, we'll move to a full group view, so we'll have a better ability to have a full-on conversation. Does that seem fair? Awesome, great. So there's 4 questions I'm going to focus on. And the first one is, what is a comprehensive plan, and, how does Watertown use it? What will that comprehensive plan focus on? How will it achieve the goals we've identified in a whole set of areas? Some of it is climate change, transportation planning, affordable housing. There's a whole host of related efforts. And then how long can the public offer their input? And when is it due? So I've got very, high level answers, and you saw the preview of my very first slide. And then I'll, Gideon, I'll be, pausing periodically to say, hey, where have I gone off track? What would you like to add to? And, with the sense that, that will be kind of a brief course correction, and then we'll have an opportunity more largely in the hour to have engaged people in convo. Sorry, text shorthand, conversation. Thank you, Dan. Glad to see you. We've already introduced you, so welcome to the group. So let's get that first slide back up, Vanna. On the comprehensive plan, if we could, that would be great. And in this view, let me get down, make sure I've got the chat open so I can see it. Terrific. Here's the definition of the comprehensive plan. And this comes straight out of the comprehensive planning website. Gideon had posted that link earlier in the chat, and we will be posting informational links and directions to various parts of the website so people can explore this information in more detail. I'm not going to read the slide to you. You can read it. Fundamentally, what it says is that the comprehensive plan is a guide. It's a basis for decision making on land use planning. We've got 4 square miles. How are we going to use it? It provides a guide for development regulation and capital improvement planning. What's capital improvement planning? How are we going to continue to invest in the resources that we the city call our own? In that, it's informed by a set of baseline assumptions. We've grown, and you've seen the statistics. We've added, population. We're now 35,000. Our budget's now 150 million. We've added, I think the 10-year growth pattern is to add, 6,000 jobs or some astronomical amount of jobs. And if you look at that baseline report, and we'll put a link up at some point in the next bit of airtime, it's got great information about how we're growing, what some of the challenges are, transportation use that's affecting all of these various parts that come into a very complicated process. If you go back to, if many of you went to the public engagement meeting, they previewed some of that data with the opening slides. So that's kind of a brief overview on the comprehensive, what it does. That's I don't have that AICPF for my name. I'm just looking at the documents. So Gideon can provide some input in a moment. So what will it focus on? And this is time for the next slide. And I'll give it a moment. It's got 4 key topics. And the 4 key topics are awesome, not complicated, land use, 4 square miles, economic development. We have a lot of new businesses moving in, a lot of new companies, the corporate sector is growing, and we have small businesses that are an important part of our community and an important part of the fabric of our community. Transportation, circulation, and parking. I had the opportunity to go to the Watertown Business Coalition meeting earlier this past week, where they were talking about the comprehensive plan. And much of the comments were focused on transportation. Got to get people into Watertown and got to get them to the businesses that are here. And then open space and recreation. Those are the four broad areas that the plan is focusing on. And there are a variety of other boards and commissions that have done parallel and complementary planning efforts. And then if we could pull up the next slide. Dense slide. There are, I don't know, 8, 11, didn't count, but there's a lot of additional information coming into this. Climate, commercial development, our vulnerability and preparation, bike ped, housing, CPA, the Community Preservation Act, the Public Arts Master Plan, community health, complete streets, Watertown for all ages. These are a variety of plans and efforts that have been worked on by boards and commissions that the comprehensive plan is considers as part of the context. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. Gideon, what else would you add to what I've said thus far?
I think you're doing a good job of providing the context, and I think that from a process perspective, the comprehensive plan is more than those 4 elements, but those were the 4 elements that we're focusing on. But we also are updating the rest of the elements / chapters of the plan. So I did want to make sure that was clear in our. Just because those are the elements doesn't mean that it's only what we're focusing on, but the previous planning efforts are going to be informing the other elements substantially more than the public process. Because they were just recently approved.
So could you please say that again, Gideon? So the other elements will be informing it more than the comprehensive plan?
The recently approved plans provide the guide to updating the other elements of the plan, and are also providing a guide to these primary 4 that we're focused on, which is the ones you just identified: transportation, economic development, open space and recreation. I think the other piece that I do want to just identify is we're actually having a separate but combined process for the open space and recreation plan, which is a state mandated update. So we, instead of having 2 separate processes, we've merged them so that the public engagement and the public conversation around open space can be a part of the comprehensive plan, but will inform a final plan that's separate and will be adopted separately.
Okay.
For open
So
space recreation.
To summarize, is that you got the comprehensive plan. We have other recently approved plans. They're guiding the comprehensive plan process. There are pieces of this that are required by law. Open space and recreation is part of it. That's been folded into the comprehensive plan process. And then when I referenced the planning website, there are other parts that, you started this off at the top of your remarks, that are required as part of a city's comprehensive plan: housing, natural and cultural resources, and services and facilities. Does that capture it? Is that a good summary?
That's a good summary.
Great, awesome. As we've gone through, I'm just going to reference some of the links in this that come up in the chat. You'll see a link to the city's reports and plans. You'll see, I think, a link to the overall comprehensive plan website. So just keep an eye on that. So the last question on this is that here we are in this process. How long is it going to take? So let's pull up this last slide, and this will be my last slide. So here's the slide that's been part of the comprehensive plan process. Was a baseline, conditions were analyzed, and a visioning process was kicked off in May. They convened a planning advisory committee, of which we have 2 members with us today, who can speak a little bit to how they're helping to engage the community. There have been surveys. There's been an interactive map on the website. We'll post a link to that as well. There's been walks and bike rides throughout the summer. And then most recently, there have been 2 public meetings where the as I understood it, the result of all of this public input was resulted in updating the vision from the 2015 comprehensive plan, and then identified 8 preliminary goals and 8 goals and preliminary strategies to guide the comprehensive plan. And I encourage you to go to the website if you weren't able to attend any of these meetings or not able to, that you still have an opportunity to offer your input. And I believe what I understood is that public input is still available until that they're still accepting public input until October 30th. And so you still have time to weigh in on all of these pieces. And
I just wanted to clarify that. So the comprehensive plan process is a continuing process. It's a living document. And so the October 30th cutoff is for the last meeting we had. We've created this, guide yourself virtual workshop, which is focused on those goals that you just noted, which are the overarching goals, but are not the policies for the plan, which are the details. And so the public stand on your own and look through that virtual workshop is open until October 30th. That's not the end of the public process.
Great. Thank you for the clarification, Gideon. That's great to know. So you've got till October 30th to weigh in on the online information that is the stuff that we reviewed in those public meetings. And then there will be opportunities for public input moving forward. My understanding is that the final plan will be, a draft plan will be presented to City Council in February or March. And then implementation is going forward. And that's where I'm unclear. So, for the public to be able to weigh in on that, how would that happen, Gideon, between the October 30th, the end of being able to engage online, and then the draft that's presented to City Council and forward?
Sure. So this virtual workshop is informing the goals and policies of the plan, which will be incorporated into a draft plan, which is being developed right now by the consulting firm. That slide that you just took down, I was using that, but it's okay. It's just to remind myself. But anyways, the dates I think are a little misrepresentative. As always, these meetings tend to slip a little because of there's a lot of holidays and other things that happen in the fall. And so we'd rather have, like, for instance, this October 30th, we bumped that out 2 weeks because there's been more of a community dialogue around this virtual workshop that we have. And so we'd rather have people have more time to look at that and provide feedback. But the draft plan update most likely will end up with an open house or a discussion around that in truly late, midwinter, December or early January is when so in December, I think, is when we're planning on having a draft plan posted and to try to get people to start looking at that and all the different policies that have been merged from the various planning processes plus the current process. Then there'll be a discussion around that. And what's kind of missing from this diagram is that between the draft plan and the final plan is a community conversation, as well as a planning board and council discussion, and perhaps hearings/meetings to finalize the plan, and then that's how the final plan is created, which would be definitely not winter. Well, I guess it depends on how you define winter. Probably around March is the goal.
Okay. So let me summarize what I think I understood, that there will be a draft plan presented to the public December, January-ish.
Yeah, I think it's December, but that's our goal, is December.
The goal, yeah, and understanding that things do slip, but the goal, the goal is to present a draft plan to the community December, January, seek more input. There will be discussions around this, and then you said, discussions in a community conversation, then it's presented to the planning board and the council, and there will be hearings on the plan with a goal of a final plan. No, I'm making this up, April?
Well, the goal would be for a March final plan, and I guess the word hearings can be misleading. So there's public meetings, and then there is a hearing to vote on and approve it, but it would be a public meeting more than a hearing where it's, duly advertised and all that, like a zoning amendment. And it could be a combined meeting, or it could be separate meetings of the council and of the planning board. We have to, find out through this process how that will occur.
Okay, great. So, the take home here is a draft report will be offered up for public input, commentary, and there'll be a process to collect that information. Then is that incorporated in the draft and then presented back to the council, or is that part of that whole hearing process at the same time?
The draft plan there's an open house of the draft plan, and then after that, there will be an updated plan that would be presented as a final draft plan.
Great.
To the planning board and council. I do want to just, I see on the chat, I'm not sure recently, but the project website, which just because this is being recorded as well, and I don't know how well chat comes to it, it's basically the city's website /comp-plan is one way to get to it in an easy way, instead of using the Engage Stantec My Social Pinpoint. So it's www.watertown-ma.gov/COMP-plan, PLAN. But I just want to highlight for everybody here, and also, that listen in later, that the document section of the project website will have and has a huge amount of information in it. It has a baseline report now that's, draft/final that provides the assessment. It also has the summary of the last meetings that were done in September, and I think it's 80 or 90 pages worth of background information as well. And then the draft plan will be posted there, and the goal would be that it's posted and then the meeting is held. But sometimes we may have the meeting and then post it, but either way, it's going to be there, and it'll be there for anyone who wants to dig into, the details and the whole document.
Okay, terrific. So Libby, I hope we've gotten to answer your question. What is the deadline for public input for goals and policies? Sounds like we've got opportunity to put input into the draft plan will come out. We've got some opportunities to put input into that before they present a final update to the council, and then there'll be a public hearing for additional commentary on that whenever that during that vote, whether it's a joint meeting of the planning board and the council. There's
no fixed deadline.
I beg your pardon?
No fixed deadline as yet.
No fixed deadline, yeah. And then there's some questions about comments still being accepted for consideration. Will any comments have responses? I can't answer that. What I can say is that people can put ideas in the chat, and we will, if there are specific planning ideas or specific ideas for the comprehensive plan, we will pull those out of the chat and send them to you, Gideon, at the end of the meeting and the Planning Advisory Committee. So if people want to use the chat as a place to put their ideas in as well, that's fine. And to answer Barbara's question, okay, so I guess, Nicole, you've answered in terms of whether there will be more opportunity to comment and whether comments will have responses. So the answer is, will comments have responses?
There will not be individual responses to every single comment.
Okay.
It's a public process, and so during the process, it's an iterative, and the documents change over time. And there's a extraordinary amount of public feedback throughout the process, and so that there's not a way to have a physical response to every single comment that's made. But I do want to just reiterate that this October 30th, there's a interactive virtual workshop, and inside of it, it's in essence, it's the questions that were given at the meeting as a survey in each page of that interactive workshop. And it's a great way to provide feedback, and it's a solid deadline for, you know, looking at some of the goals and the ideas there. So it's that is one hard deadline that we've moved out to October 30th so that we can get more comments. Later on in the process, it'll be a drafted plan, so it's coming together more. It's, you know, solidifying at that stage.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's terrific that, thank you very much, that, you know, for the planning department for, you know, it sounds like you've moved it out a couple of weeks to make room for additional public comment in recognition of the interest in this plan. And there is, one of the most recent links we posted in the chat is a direct link to that virtual workshop. So again, just another PSA to check out the links in the chat where we posted it to the public workshop slide presentation and to the virtual workshop itself. I know there's a bunch of questions, and this is the next part of our meeting will be about the questions. Janet, I see your hand up. We'll take a question there, and then I'm going to flip this over to Janice, who's going to take a poll of the questions of the group, and we'll focus our conversation for the rest of the hour on what's on people's minds with some guidance. Janet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm reacting to the question that was asked by somebody recently, and that was also brought up at the last meeting about how the zoning process works. And that is regarding, people are invited to make comments at public hearings and online and in a lot of ways. But as we've heard from the people who make the comments and, you know, acknowledged by Gideon, very often the comments are not acknowledged and addressed. And I know I'm a member of the planning board, and this happens frequently. People will speak up for a couple of hours about their concerns, and then rather than react and respond to each question directly, we move forward and take a vote, and everybody feels like they were not heard. So I'm concerned about this process where we're inviting people to make comments, but their comments may not be acknowledged or accepted. And how I would just like to address, you know, I could go on and on about the limits of the planning board and how we can only respond to things that are in the zoning and so on. But I do want to make sure that the issue is addressed. How do people know that they were heard?
Thank you, Janet. It's a question that came up a lot during the charter review process. When I think about the charter review process, there were embedded in the charter, and, you know, Janice spoke briefly about the charter tracker in terms of tracking the changes to the charter. There were efforts to embed to help Watertown city government be more transparent in terms of communication. And I think there's efforts being put in place to move toward that goal. I can at least say that in terms of the charter, specifically about how we as a community respond to individual input. That's something I'm going to ask any of the counselors here, in addition to Gideon, if they might want to briefly respond to that, in terms of how will we hear or reflect on the questions and input of the community, recognizing that there's a lot of voices, and is there a way to reflect back that those comments and questions have been heard?
So I do want to just identify that, again, the project document folder has the public input summary, which I noted before. I'm not sure if you posted that yet, but within that it provides a summary of all the different comments that were made through the 2 public workshop meetings that just were held. What I was, and I'm trying not to be defensive, in order to have a public process where every single email that comes in, every point that's made by every single person is individually responded to, is not one that's feasible for our staff level. We have this public iterative process. So what I hope is that through the process, you'll see comments coming out through the the plans that are coming together at the next stage of the process through this, these comments that are made. But I do hear what you're saying with and so I can hand it back for other thoughts on that.
Thank you, Gideon. And this is, as you mentioned, Janet, this is feedback that came up at the zoning information meeting earlier last week. And it's feedback and input from the community that was part of the comprehensive part of the charter review process as well. So I think this is something that has been part of the community wish. And I think that there's some, systemic efforts to improve it overall. All right.
I have one other, I realize that a lot of people don't know, but so I'm planning staff at the city. There's other staff there. We are always available. I think that the process of just electronic, lots of separate emails or conversations, we're available in our offices, and people do call or come into our office on a regular basis, ask questions, and we certainly can provide them with responses or help them, guide them if they're having trouble with the project website, or if they have questions about planning or zoning in Watertown. So I do think that that's, it's a resource, and I just wanted to identify that, we try to be as responsive as possible. So when people do send us emails that are asking questions about whether it's a zoning project or a planning process, where we do respond. It's just that with this process where we have a series of surveys, we're not responding to every single, well, those are also anonymous. So we can't actually respond to that. We take that into the public process.
Thank you, Gideon. You got questions. I'm going to turn this over to Janice so we can continue to ask questions and talk with one another about what's on our mind with the comprehensive plan. Thank you, Gideon, for kind of, making three-dimensional, my very high-level comments, and I'll turn this over to Janice.
Great, thank you, Tia. Great segue, and thank you, Gideon. I think part of what we are trying to offer as well, Watertown Forward, is another small opportunity to really have your voice heard directly with some of the key players. So please feel free, again, if there's anything else that we can address in any city chat like this that is important to you, we're open to hearing those ideas for that reason, Janet. Eric, I do see your hand up. I will happily call on you. I'm just going to wait until after the poll runs, and then we'll get going with the Q&A. I'm sure you have a question at the ready, and I appreciate that. Please hang on to that. So just to give you a little bit of grounding here, we are going to, in a moment here, launch a poll. And we are somewhat limited with the options for polling in Zoom. So as you heard, this is a really complex topic. This is why we thought it was best to draw on the wisdom of some of the folks directly involved, which is why we brought them here today. We are going to, in order to really focus our next hour, we came up with 5 questions that we are going to put in the poll and that you will vote on. That was sort of the best way we could do this, outside of just sort of getting inundated with 75 different questions, and we can only address a very small amount. We tried, what we did, just so you have a background on how we came up with these 5 questions, they're not random. As a part of our preparation for today's city chat, the design team for this particular meeting reached out informally to people in the community, some at community workshops, some at, as Tia mentioned, Watertown Business Coalition events, a handful of good old-fashioned phone calls to people involved in different initiatives and commissions and board in town, to identify both how well people understood the comprehensive plan and also to get a read on what maybe they wanted to know more about. We understand that this was a very small sampling. Don't be offended if we didn't call you. We are a very small group. Please volunteer with us. We need help. But after listening to what we think was a fairly, representative in our small community, we identified 5 common categories that sort of were emerging thematically. And so we've put those in a poll, and hopefully they, at least one, if not a couple, captures some of the questions that you're bringing to the table today. So when you look at this poll, there'll be 5 questions, and we're asking you to select your top 3 because I think that's realistically what we can get through today, because some of these questions are sort of layered questions. They have a few components to them. So if you will just, it's a multiple choice poll. Perfect timing, Vana, thank you. This is the poll here. These are the 5 questions we have, and I'll read them for anyone if this writing is a little bit small. So it does say pick top 2. We decided on top 3, and I didn't edit the poll. That's my fault. So pick top 3. The first question is, what does the comprehensive plan not do or not cover? We've been hearing a lot about what it is, but sometimes considering what it is not can help shed some light and further understanding around this. The second question is, what are examples of how the comprehensive plan will help meet the goals of other complementary planning efforts, for example, transportation, climate, housing, and how will this happen? This maybe gets to the question you had put in the chat earlier, Eric, I believe it was. And then the third question, what are examples of areas of agreement on the comprehensive plan and areas of contention that would require trade-offs? Fourth question, what are examples of how public input has changed the direction of the comprehensive plan thus far? And then the final question we have for you is how can the public continue to participate during this process? So part of the reason I read those aloud was to vamp for a few minutes while you were all voting. Give it another few seconds here. If anyone would like me to repeat those, I'm happy to do that. Please just put that request in the chat or raise your hand on it. Looks like we're starting to see some trends here. All right, give it just a few more seconds. And if we don't, if we get through the 3 questions that emerge to the top fairly quickly and satisfactorily, we will then go to those final 2 questions. And if there's anything that we did not ask here that you think is very important or valuable, please put those questions in the chat as well, because we are also, again, we're keeping track of ideas, comments, and questions that we won't have time to address today to help guide possibly future meetings, chats, materials, and is also good information for some of the guests we invited here today to read. So feel free to do that. Okay, so we have about 90% of the people here today have voted. So maybe we'll just get started with what we know at least is the top 2. So let's see here. The first that's bubbling up is, what are examples of areas of agreement on the comprehensive plan and areas of contention that would require some amount of trade-off? And then looks like the second most popular question is the idea of how the comprehensive plan will help meet the goals of other complementary planning efforts in town. And then the third is, what are examples of how public input has changed the direction of the comprehensive plan thus far? So I'm saying those aloud to keep me honest, Tia, because once this poll goes down, I may forget. But we will certainly start off with that first one that I mentioned, which is what are examples of areas of agreement and contention that may require trade-offs. And I will give Vana a minute to close that poll so we can all see each other's faces as we start. And I think we can share results. Great. Okay. Great. So instead of calling, and again, we have John Arasian here, we have Dan Tomiko, and we have Gideon Schreiber here today to help share some ideas, some thoughts, answer some of these questions. We also have other wisdom in the crowd that may help to shed some light on some specific questions. So instead of having each panelist answer each individual question, which may just naturally, emerge on its own, but I would like to sort of pose that question to our guests and see if it speaks to any one of the 3 of you first. If so, feel free to unmute yourself and address that particular question, which I will repeat just for posterity again. What we're addressing first is, what are examples of areas of agreement on the comprehensive plan and areas of contention that might require trade-offs? And then possibly, how will we resolve those differences? Would anyone like to get started? John, Gideon, or Dan?
Sure. How did I know that that question was going to be the most popular on the poll? So I'm unmuted now, so I apologize. Sunday evening is an active time in my household, so you may hear a random scream here or there. So I apologize in advance, but
Halloween season, it's very on brand.
right. So I think this is a great question. Not everybody agrees with everyone 100% all the time, so we have to realize that there are going to be situations like this that come up. But I think that much of the climate action plan resonates with people. There may be some things within the plan that may cause strain or worry with certain people, but I believe that the city will find innovative ways or programs to kind of guide not only residents but business owners or commercial property owners to certain programs that may be available. We need to find innovative ways to help some of these business owners and property owners with some of this stuff. So I think that I feel like that is the climate action plan is a great thing, and we just have to keep pushing that forward because there's a lot of stuff within the plan, and not everyone's going to be excited about it. So I think we have to really work together and as a council and really as a city, just find, as I had mentioned, innovative ways to really help the people through any process that they may have to kind of weed through. I think a point of contention, just because we've seen it in other, or I've read about it in other communities, is has to do with bike lanes on streets and dedicated bike lanes. I think we've done a lot here in Watertown for the bike ped. The bike ped committee has done great things, and I think that as a city we've really moved forward. So I feel like there's always a point of contention as far as businesses losing parking, traffic feeling like it's getting worse because there are dedicated structures for the bike lane. So I think that that may be a point of contention. Not really sure how we would resolve that or what the trade-offs may be. But having said that, I think that a city like us, we need to have amenities like that for the people who like to bike to work and bike to Arsenal Yards and to Watertown Square. So I think we have to be very cognizant of that, but at the same time, we have to look at the big picture of things and understand that Watertown is a busy place. It is how a lot of people get to work because a lot of them go through Watertown Square. So I think we really have to be cognizant of that as well. So again, not sure I have any answer for what the trade-offs might be, but I can see that, boiling down to a point of contention possibly.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is a big question. I'd be very impressed if you had all the answers for what the trade-offs might be in this moment. But I want to just open the floor at this time for anybody who might have thoughts or comments around at least those two points that John brought up around climate energy, bike lanes, bike ped, transportation. Eric, I see your hand. Go for it.
So this is actually my what I raised my hand for before. Yeah, for the Resilient Watertown plan, it's a long-term plan, so not everything could be put in place at once. But regardless of how people think about addressing climate change, it will happen anyway. So if we can help to mitigate and if we can prepare to adapt, that would be much better. And so my request would be in short-term planning efforts like this to not block implementation from some of the measures that are there, not put things in place that would make it hard to implement the longer-term plan. So that's just something I would ask to pay attention to. Another is that there were some surveys that went into that, and so some of the issues that are addressed, like around mobility and so on, these are challenges that people are having. And so I would say some of the transport issues are really good. Finally, there's something that isn't in the goals, but I think is a really valuable output from the Resilient Watertown Plan, which is the guidance on equity, about how to address people, for example, renters who might have difficulty achieving some of their own goals, elderly, mobility impaired, and so on. So there's some really good pointers that for each of the items, there's a box on equity concerns that would address concerns with particular groups within Watertown. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention if that's not currently on the table. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eric. And Merle, great suggestion. I will be sure to give opportunity for the other guests to weigh in to make sure we're getting perspectives from everybody. I just wanted to riff off this as a starting point to get the juices flowing and people participating. I don't think we're going to have an issue with this crowd after all. So Nicole, I see your hand next.
Thanks, Janice. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, Eric. It would be helpful for me from my own learning if you could give an example or two of choices we might be making now that will make it harder for us later to achieve our long-term goal around climate action. Some tangible examples would help me.
That is great. Off the top of my head, the ones I could pull up would be about transport, because that's the one that I worked on, but there were a lot. But for example, electrification is going to take time, but preparing for a shift towards electric vehicles is something that you can prepare for now. Another one is less motorized transport, which can actually help some people who have challenges getting around right now because of difficulties with the streets, navigating the streets. And so there are things so the longer term plan for a reduction in motorized transport wouldn't happen right away, but some of the things that you could put in place that would make that easier to implement would also address people's mobility challenges today. So this is what I'm thinking about is can you look at kind of what's the longer term plan, and is there something that would move in that direction that would actually meet a near term goal and be a recognizable win?
Can I add, is that okay if I speak up? Or
Please.
I do want to just clarify, because of how Eric was saying this, that the irony is that the comprehensive plan is the long range plan for the city for everything. And zoning is one implementation tool. I think earlier some people were kind of, it's hard when we mix, we just had a conversation around planning and zoning in Watertown. Zoning, follows planning, but then we also have zoning before planning. And so the resiliency plan is one specific implementation tool, which is crossed across many different topic areas. And the city during the zoning process is actually asking for and receiving, updated charging stations on redevelopments. So, they start with 3 and we get 8 stations for charging. That's a big change, but those are specific implementation pieces that are happening today because we have zoning, a comp plan, and resiliency planning in place. So we need the comprehensive plan to speak to those other planning efforts, which is a separate, I know it's one of these other categories, but I wanted to make sure that we all are on the same page, that the comprehensive plan is the long range, plan for the city that incorporates all topic areas. And so it actually is by default going to have the most conflicts of topic area because, and I just wrote down one, and I won't go all over this, but I saw that Libby's on this call, so I'll just note one specific. We need to plant more trees. We need to have better gardening opportunities, and we need to have solar panels. Those 3 things are conflicting with each other sometimes. And so you can have all 3 goals and as part of the implementation, you have to weigh the pros and cons of which one is the one that rises to the top for a specific area of the city or a specific site. And so that's one example of a conflict that has always been going on. There's many more of those very specifics, but just to throw that out.
Thank you for that perspective, Gideon. And I do see your hand, Libby. But Gideon, while I have you on the horn, just addressing Merle's comment, is there any other, after perhaps these past 2 community workshops, is there anything that you didn't already have on that list that you're seeing a lot of energy behind in the community in terms of areas of contention? Perhaps it's something that you could have predicted, or maybe it's surprising that hasn't been mentioned by John or yourself yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ones that John Arasian noted are that is inherently, creates conflicts. We also have conflicts that we hear about all the time with the desire for more housing, but also more open space in a community that's, pretty much 100% constructed on already. And so all choices we make for the future require trade-offs for a built environment that's built out. And, the city's redeveloping, our right-of-ways are defined in what they are today. So they're not becoming bigger per se. So that there's a lot of these trade-offs that we see there. I think the public comments that I hear through our, all of our processes, and then through this comprehensive plan process, are things that we hear. There's no new surprises, I think, but there's, there's definitely, it's exciting to see how much interest there is in sustainability and resiliency, and that it's, that we have a plan that was just adopted, and we actually have implementation strategies that are moving forward. That's actually a very specific plan. It's an action plan, and it has specific actions that need to be taken versus a comprehensive plan, which is a bigger, longer range. So I could go on for.
No, I appreciate it. All of this is great information. I think we probably have time for 2 more questions and or comments before we move on to our second question. So Libby, take it away.
My concerns are first and foremost, as Gideon described, if we're talking about the comprehensive plan basically as a way to manage land use, I think the definition of land, what really concerns me about what's missing from the comprehensive plan is a definition of land use that recognizes the environmental function of land. But setting that aside, what actually caused me to raise my hand was thinking about Coolidge Square, where I've lived for the last 40 years, and how important all our small storefronts are. And I'm just wondering, do some of our town planners have a vision of Watertown in the future that somehow doesn't include all those little storefronts? Does it have a vision of Watertown without single family homes or two family homes? Is the vision for the future, a whole bunch of 5 and 6 and plus unit apartment buildings with hopefully some good landscaping around it? But I mean, I'm really concerned about where we're going if we don't really pay attention to the quality of our community and the quality of our environment. That's a general I'm not sure if that's a helpful comment, but that's on my mind.
Very helpful comment. But I want to actually get Dan into this conversation.
Yeah, that's good.
And Dan, I'm not sure if you're raising your hand to respond to Libby or to just add a new thought. But I'm going to give you the floor, and then I'm going to and then I'll sort of see where we're at here. I just want to make sure we're leaving enough time for the other 2 questions.
Awesome. I just wanted to add some more thoughts. Sorry, my video is not working for whatever reason. But I think John and Gideon touched upon the major ones: affordable housing, being contentious. I think there's also that give and take between like how much business are we bringing in? Are we overdeveloping? Things like that. What I would just add, I guess, are areas that there seems to be agreement, if not necessarily how to move forward, aside from the environmental issues, are having a bigger role for like the Charles River and the usage of the Charles River in town. Also, arts and culture has come up a couple times, and it seems like that's something obviously everyone wants to see more of. And then the trickier one that seems to come up is the Watertown Square area, making that place more functionable, more easy, more accessible. It seems like that's always something that everyone complains about, but nobody really, I wouldn't say knows, but everyone has a different idea of like what it should look like or how to go forward. So I think those are 3 issues as well that I would just throw in there.
Thank you. Really appreciate your perspective, especially with your sort of boots on the ground in the Planning Action Committee surveying the folks of Watertown. Janet, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your question as well.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Daniel hit on a lot of the points that I was going to mention, but what it sort of focuses on to me when I hear about what are items of contention in looking ahead on the planning board and in reading all of the news and comments, it seems to me that one of the biggest issues is how much development or how much commercial development does the town want to promote? And we hear a lot of, oh, that's one too many lab building, we have enough lab buildings and so on. But that's not something like the planning board can say, oh yeah, I think you're right, let's stop it right now. This has to be guided by a comprehensive plan as well as an understanding of private property owners' rights. So I think addressing the balance between further commercial development versus any other form of residential and open spaces is a big issue.
Thank you, Janet. I want to give any of our guests one opportunity to maybe respond to what Janet just said, and I would love to echo that sentiment. Just personally as a resident, I'd say that was probably the conversation I have most, at least on my street, my little Capitol Street. I think the area of development, how much, where, what type is a common conversation that I hear, at least in my small little South End community. Did any of you want to weigh in on that before we transition to the next question?
I'd like to weigh in, and I also would speak to Libby's comment, which is somewhat similar. The community has spoken multiple times about keeping the neighborhoods and keeping the Coolidge Square businesses. If obviously those are private businesses, so if they all decided to close, they'd be gone. But so everyone has to support their businesses that are local if they treasure them. But from a perspective of zoning or the comprehensive plan, the previous plan and this plan so far, no one said, let's get rid of the 1 and 2 family neighborhoods of Watertown. And some of them were built well before planning or zoning was in place. And some of them were built when zoning was only in place and there was no planning. And those neighborhoods are continued. They're basically areas that people would like to see maintained, quote unquote, preserved, but not densified or turned into 5-story buildings all over. The industrial core, which Watertown was substantially historically, was almost, I think it was close to half industry. That's the parts that are changing. And that's what the plan said before. That's what this plan is identifying again. It's not a surprise. It was railroad yards. It was heavy industry. It has a lot of contamination, and it also is some of our prime resources, like the river corridor. And so when we talk about like the push and pull of land use, as Janet said, it's private properties. All of it is private property that we're talking about. There's very little publicly owned property that we are talking about in it. And there's not a conversation about changing a park into a affordable housing complex. It's about people who already own properties that are private and how so either the city buys it or it's redeveloped through the city, through that process. So that is an interesting piece. I don't know if I spoke enough to Janet's questions or comments, but.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we have time for. All of these are very complex issues, and we've got a list of maybe, I think I have 11 different, areas of contention that I think we're all sort of responding to right now, which is, I'm sure this is what you run into constantly, Gideon, on your planning committee. Where do we start? Everything needs conversation. But I think this is a great way to at least start to hear from some community members that are here today, at least, what they're most passionate about, and what they have their eye on. So a lot more to come on that front, I'm sure, with this new workshop and the report coming. I'm interested to read as well. So we will transition now to our second question, which, just as a reminder, was what are examples of how the comprehensive plan will help meet the goals of other complementary planning efforts, for example, climate, energy, arts and culture committee, affordable housing, all of those things that we were sort of listing before that already have existing boards or commissions involved with them. And how will this happen? Again, I'll just sort of open it up to our three guests first. If anyone wants to take a first response to this, happy to repeat the question if that is helpful for everybody in the audience. Just give me a little thumbs up emoji or a comment in the chat, and I will happily do that. And actually, I might even just have you, Tia, you want to cut and paste that question in the chat for me? I have too many windows open.
Yes, I will. So just as I do that, I'll read it again. Examples of how the comprehensive plan helps meet the goals of the other complementary planning efforts. And remember that slide I put up, those 8 bullets, and that's housing, economic development, transportation, climate. There's a host of them, and these are plans that Gideon referenced in terms of the being complementary and guide, being inputs into the comprehensive plan. And I'm still vamping, and apparently I cannot do 2 things at once. So I'm getting there. I promise.
No worries. While you work on that, I will give the floor.
So Janice, I'm not sure. Oh, sorry, John. I was going to say, I don't want to be the one speaking to, I guess I'm the planner and so Dan or John want to speak to their thoughts on it. I was going to defer to them.
John, you want
Yeah,
to that's your cue.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of where, for lack of a better term, the rubber meets the road. Once this plan is completed, it's up to the city to be consistent with the strategies and goals of the plan. I think that we have a lot of things in place now as a city that are going to help us, move forward. One, going back to the climate action plan. I mean, that runs the gamut from a lot of the things that we're talking about here, as far as transportation, land use, recreation, things of that nature. So I think the climate action plan kind of, overlaps a lot of what we're talking about here. We also have the Watertown Housing Trust now, the community preservation that's going to be helpful. So I think, we're in good position once this is implemented with some of the things that really the council, a lot of what I'm voting for now is what the hard work of some councils that came before me, but these things are in place. And I think that it's going to make it, it's not going to be easy, but it's just it gives us a better path to really get these goals in place once this plan is done.
Thank you, John, for getting us started. I see Nicole's hand up.
Yeah, I guess I have a question, which is some of these plans are relatively new, like the Climate and Energy Action Plan. Perfect. That should be aligned in my mind completely with what we're doing now with comprehensive planning. On the flip side, I don't know when the bike ped plan was produced, but it probably is at least a couple, 2-3 years old. Let's just posit that for the discussion. Am I right in thinking that if the comprehensive plan says we're going to go north by northeast on bike ped, the old plan said we're going north, the north by northeast is what's going to be the guiding star, right? And then that committee or that plan will get reviewed and amended so that they are working in harmony and in the, toward the same I just want to understand how that, like, what is that linkage? Because some of these are old.
So during the process, we identify things that are conflicting. And for the bike ped plan was adopted just 2 years ago, so it's actually very, very new. But with the resiliency planning process identified some new information that could be incorporated into a updated bike ped plan or the comprehensive plan. I mean, these are all goals, and some of them may be conflicting with each other, but you have to have a balance. It's if a plan says we'd like to do X, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from doing Y as well. So I guess there's implementation items and specifics. So it just depends. It's so hard to generalize when there's so many specific goals in a resiliency plan versus the bike ped plan versus others. But the comprehensive plan, trying to lose my train of thought here as far as, with this question, there's a lot of questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, I was going to actually suggest if you want to address any of those directly in the chat, feel free to respond directly in there if you feel like you can.
Yeah, so I think the comprehensive plan is intended to be a tool to do implementation as well, like the resiliency plan. So, and I think a lot of the questions in the chat are speaking to, zoning or barriers, whether it's zoning or some other regulation. And so, sometimes regulations are barriers to making change. And so if the comprehensive plan identifies that we should take action so that we can make changes for Watertown Square, there will be there may be some general things that are identified in the comp plan, and then there would be another process to look at the zoning and land use within the square more specifically at a much more specific level for implementing it as a zoning amendment. And I think Ivana also mentioned that with some of the rules and regs around wishing for something or wanting something, that changing the rules may not actually get you that something because it's private property, but also, parking minimums. Today the zoning requires parking for all restaurants or all housing, no matter what. We have minimums that we have maximums that have been introduced, but we still have some minimums. So the comprehensive plan will have will incorporate more of those things from the previous plans and will help for providing the guidance. And it may update certain items from previous plans because they're all they're all living documents and things change, and you can't predict all the new technologies or new information that's coming out of science, etc.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gideon, for on that. Go ahead, John. I saw your hand sort of gesture earlier, so to make sure.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure it was a hand.
Yeah. No, just to add to that, and to Nicole's point, she had mentioned the bike and ped committee. Like, a lot of what needs to happen here once this is implemented is, we're not dealing with one party here. We really have to work with our state reps and senators and groups such as yourself and different committees to really, to get these things done. So it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of cooperation, a lot of patience, persistence, to really get these things done. And, I was in one of the questions that you had initially asked about what the plan does and does not cover or may not cover. Something that would be valuable here, maybe, having some data and being able to measure some of these things along the way to see, make sure that these are good ideas and that, we can report back to the community, and it'll just be a valuable tool for the city and the residents, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Vinny, I see your hand up and I'm just looking at the time. I want to make sure we have enough, a few minutes for our last question as well. And I want to make sure we get Dan's input if he has any. No pressure. If you don't have any thoughts you want to add, that's also okay. But we'll start with Vinny and then we'll go to Dan.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I just wanted to add the question that Nicole raised. I would say that every single study or other plan that the council has taken up since 2015 has drawn on the elements that were in the 2015 comprehensive plan, whether it was the bicycle pedestrian plan that we just adopted 2 years ago, which we did a new study, so the housing plans, the municipal vulnerability plans, even the climate and energy plan was anticipated in the 2015 comprehensive plan. So that actually has been the council's sort of guiding document as we take up all these other plans over the years. So there is if you go through them and actually you look at the 2015 plan, all these other plans that were listed on that slide sort of tie back to ideas that were in the original 2015 plan. So I just wanted to say that the council has been doing that. So thanks.
Great, thank you for that perspective. I want to loop in Dan really quickly before we switch to question number 3.
I guess all I would add is that the comprehensive plan should include these updated plans. And I think the main thing, I guess, as a takeaway that I would give the group is to just stay active, because it all comes down to accountability once the plans are set. Like Vinny mentioned, some of the plans did come out of what were goals for the 2015 comprehensive plan. So it's just a matter of making sure that's followed through on this time around as well, and making sure that you stay active, you're holding leaders accountable, and that we keep working towards the progress we want to make.
Thank you, Dan, very much. So moving on, again, I feel like we could spend a lot of time on each of these, but this is just sort of a tasting for today. Okay, so the third question, and just remind me, Tia, was what are examples of how public input has changed the direction of the comprehensive plan thus far? That was the third.
Yes.
So we'll put that one in the chat for you. And if any of the 3 of you want to take that first to get us started, just looking to get some of your responses to that question.
I'll start off, I guess. I love this question. As you know, as I was looking into the prior comprehensive plan before our April meeting, I came across something in my father's office that, like, I just loved. It was an old small booklet. It was called Watertown Square Revitalization Packet. It's right here, if you can see that. And I loved this thing. It's I don't know when it's from, but I loved it. I read the whole thing, and I just found it interesting. They look at Watertown Square as a whole, and including Main Street, Pleasant Street, Mount Auburn, Galen, Watertown Street, and now we section them off into corridors, which I think is great. But what this showed me is that a lot of what's in here is some of the things that we're still talking about today, but it's also changed, and that's because of the input of the public. And I think that it's such a valuable thing we have here in Watertown. It's such an engaged and active community that a bunch of this stuff has changed. They were talking about commercial and walkability in this plan, that little packet I just held up. But now we're talking about resiliency and housing and transportation and community wellness. There wasn't a mention of that in here. So those are all examples of how public input has kind of changed the direction. I mean, a lot of it's the same, but there are some stuff. There's stuff that's added in, that's relevant to us now. And I think that's empowering, and it's a powerful statement for showing how Watertown is engaged and does understand what a city like us deserves. So I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. I would love to flip through that book.
Absolutely. I'll make a photocopy. It's bound by this. It's crazy, but it's cool. It's all drawings. There's no photos. It's
Earl
old.
wants a copy. Everybody wants a copy.
Yeah.
Janet wants a copy.
Janet Buck wrote that it was her architectural thesis from 1982.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was before there were photographs that you could print. That
That's
was when you had to get them developed and cut them out and put them together. Now, honestly, that's where that came from.
Is it?
I
Yes.
love that.
It's
Yes.
fantastic. I'm so glad I had it.
That is amazing. Magic happening, all
I
because of
love
Watertown
that.
Ford.
And I wonder if, if there's a way that if you wanted to, perhaps Watertown Ford could sponsor a copy to that, if that is comfortable for the thesis writer and for other people. So I offer that up.
Well,
if it's not
I mean, we
otherwise
can easily
available.
scan it at work.
Great.
That would be great. Yes.
I really can't vouch for, I mean, it would be interesting for me to read it again, but I can't vouch for the accuracy of anything.
I think that that was the outcome. I think it was from the 80s, and it was when the city was considering removing the rotary and then trying to revitalize Baptist Walk, because we also have a poster of that same thing, and it also doesn't have a date on it, which so whoever was doing the consulting work after your work, Janet, didn't put a date on their work for the revitalization of the square. So that I assume that was from the 80s when they were looking at ways to make Baptist Walk and Merchants Row, and they put the lights in on Merchants Row at the time and came up with the mural. And
Wow. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that, John. That's fantastic. And I feel is probably a great place to end on. I know we only have sort of one more minute before our meeting before our meeting really starts to come to a close. Instead of opening up a whole new topic, I think we'll probably just end it there for today, knowing that there's so much more to discuss. And this has actually given us a lot of great ideas, and we'll be minding the chat later for some things that we didn't get to help drive some of our future directions as a group, and maybe inspire, Gideon and John and Dan to bring some feedback back to some of their committee meetings. And thank you very much for the offer of getting that copy out to us, if that's okay with the author. That would be really fantastic to offer that to the community at large. So I want to just, first of all, and most importantly, take an opportunity to thank our three expert guests here today. Gideon, John, Dan, for taking time out on a Sunday to answer more questions about something that you answer questions about all week. It's so valuable to us here in Watertown Ford and to the larger community, and really shows your commitment to the project and to the residents of Watertown. And I really want to genuinely thank you for being here and spending your time with us and offering us your thoughts. Because every time I talk about the comprehensive plan, I learn something new that I didn't even think of. So this is all fantastic for me as a resident as well. Before we part, if I could ask you just to stay on for a few more minutes. We have just a couple things to go over before you get to your Sunday festivities. And while the comprehensive plan is fresh in your brains, there are just a couple of things that we'd like you to think about before you go that sort of came up in conversations as we were trying to brainstorm around those 5 questions we gave you. And one that we thought was important was really how can we work to make this planning process easier for folks to understand and digest? We don't have an answer for that. And we don't expect that you have an answer for that, John, Dan, or Gideon. But if anybody in the audience today has a possible suggestion that might make this info easier to access, easier to understand, we encourage you to put those suggestions in the chat. And also any ideas that will help. It will also just help Watertown Forward in the planning department next steps as well. And then the other question we want you to think about is how Watertown Forward can continue to contribute to the process of educating, engaging the community around the comprehensive plan. Is there something that you wish we would do or not do or add to that would be helpful for you? So please feel free to put any of those suggestions in the chat, and we will take those into consideration very seriously, because we are here for you. Now, early in the meeting, I mentioned that Watertown Forward is working on a few projects for the community, which we are, and we're very excited about those. The first includes offerings like this, periodic city chats, as we're calling them, on various topics. And we're also, and feel free to put any suggestions around future topics that you would like us to cover. And then we are also offering our ongoing communication through our website and our emails and our social media channels like Facebook. And we also have a brand new, now live interactive charter dashboard, which is a virtual tool. It lays out the basics of Watertown's progress on implementing changes to the city charter. We're really excited about this one. Took a lot of effort to put together, and it's a tool that we think is a real asset to the community with so many changes in our charter, many of them substantive. This tool is a way to help people just sort of quickly and easily stay abreast of any progress, which we will be updating regularly, and it would be an otherwise Herculean task for any one individual to try to find and track on their own. So we're hoping this is very helpful for folks. To that end, it does take a village to get these projects up and running and maintained, and we could really use the help of anybody who might have an interest in joining our group in any capacity. We would love to have people volunteer with us, or even just inquire and learn about what opportunities we do have. We have a whole host of opportunities, some discrete tasks, some ongoing volunteer work, depending on how much time or interest you have. So Vana has put this very informative slide up for you to take down our information, so you can either email us or follow us, and we have a list of volunteer opportunities on our website, which is also listed there. And this is just general stuff on how you can stay in touch with us. I think that's all that's on there. Yes. And that, my friends, concludes our evening together, just 1 minute shy of 7:30. And again, thank you all for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So we hope to see you at future events. And